Coming to you all from Genesis chapter 39, verses 6 through 12. And it reads as follows. I'm reading from the Contemporary English Version. It says, Potiphar left everything up to Joseph, and with Joseph there, the only decision he had to make was what he wanted to eat. Joseph was well built and handsome, and Potiphar's wife soon noticed him. She asked him to make love to her, but he refused and said, "My master isn't worried about anything in his house, because he has placed me in charge of everything he owns. No one in my master's house is more important than I am. The only thing he hasn't given me is you, and that's because you are his wife. I won't sin against God by doing such a terrible thing as this." She kept begging Joseph day after day, but he refused to do what she wanted or even go near her. One day, Joseph went to Potiphar's house to do his work, and none of the other servants were there. Potiphar's wife grabbed hold of his coat and said, "Make love to me." Joseph ran out of the house, leaving her hanging onto his coat. This message is for anybody that has ever had someone challenge you in your convictions, challenge you based upon what you believed in. Joseph was in his master's house, and his master's wife is now wanting him because she's noticing him being well built and handsome, as the Bible describes him as. He has an opportunity to do something and not get caught. How many times in our lives have we had the opportunity to do something and not be caught? Like the clerk that gave you too much change back. Do you keep the change or do you give it back to them? Listen, honesty is what you've done. Integrity is who you are. Where are you in your convictions? I can think of a time in my life when it was the very first, a couple months in of being abstinent. I remember the very first test, or one of the very first tests in person that I received. It was a woman. She was attracted to me and made a dumb decision of going over her house late at night. Wanted to talk to her. She wanted to talk to me about my beliefs. I was like, okay, not initially on paper, on surface level, on my immature, spiritually immature level, it seemed harmless. Like, okay, she wants me to come over. We're just going to talk about what we believe. So as we begin to talk about our beliefs and sharing the faith, things started to get a little interesting. She started to throw on different videos on YouTube, and it's not important for me to call her name. She may even be watching this video, and I'm not going to say your name because it's not important to the story. But before I knew it, she jumped on my lap. Now, I'm about 4 months into my abstinence journey. So that means before that, heavily promiscuous. The sex before marriage thing, I was doing it. So when people listen to me and sometimes when I talk, they may not know the backstory of where I've come from. I've come from being promiscuous, and now I'm almost at 3 years of being abstinent. And I have a girlfriend now, so it's both of us. She was on this journey. We were both on this journey before we met, but now we are continuing this journey together. And when I look at this text, it jumps out at me because Potiphar, the king, he trusted Joseph enough, and Joseph had enough integrity. He felt that Potiphar had enough trust in him. He gave him the ability to do whatever he wants. The only thing he had to do is worry about, what did the text say? It says, Potiphar left everything up to Joseph, verse 6. And with Joseph there, the only decision he had to make was what he wanted to eat. But he also had to make another decision. Do you really believe what you believe? Do you really feel that you have the favor on your life? Do you feel that when God says that sex should be between a husband and a wife, do you really believe that sex should be between a husband and a wife? If you believe that, there could be someone that may test you in that area. But what did Joseph do? Let's go all the way down to verse 11. One day Joseph went to Potiphar's house to do his work, and none of the other servants were there. Potiphar's wife grabbed hold of his coat and said, "Make love to me." Joseph ran out of the house, leaving her hanging onto his coat. So when that girl jumped onto my lap, I had to leave her place. I have to go. Hey, if you don't mind, please get off of me. And I had to physically remove her off of me, and I had to go. That's a hard thing to do, because in your mind, this flesh, this body that we have, this mind that we have, that's why it's so important to have the right people around you. This mind that we have may try to rationalize something that is irrational. I'm like, well, I was having a weak moment. I'm like, well, maybe, oral sex is not real sex. Maybe if I'm in a compromising situation, what can I do? When those thoughts started entering my mind, I knew it was time to get out of there, y'all. Sometimes you got to know when it's time to just get out of there. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18 says, flee from sexual immorality. It says that in the very beginning. Flee from sexual immorality. There's nothing, fellas, if you're listening and you're beginning this abstinence journey, or you're thinking about starting this abstinence journey, remember one thing. If you don't remember anything about what I've said so far, remember this. There's nothing soft, there's nothing weak about fleeing something that you believe in. Fleeing something for the sake of what you believe in. If you're fleeing, if you're leaving, the Bible says flee, and that can be physically. I'm out. Hey, it's getting late. It's probably time for me to leave. Hey, it's getting late. It's probably time for you to leave. Flee works both ways. Either I'm fleeing or I'm fleeing you by having you leave. It's nothing wrong with that. Joseph had to get out of there. Potiphar's wife was grabbing him. She first asked him. He said, no. The king has given him the ability in the decision making over everything except for you, because you're his wife. What are we doing here? What are you doing here? It's time for us to be able to stand up for what we believe in. And there's going to be, as long as we live, there's always going to be temptations for us to go back to the things that were comfortable to us, which was destructive to us. Had I stayed in the house any longer, if the girl was sitting on my lap, the woman was sitting on my lap, y'all. I'm a man at the end of the day. On my lap, I'm like, Lord, get me out of here. And I just heard, leave. I gotta go. Hey, gotta go. Sometimes you just gotta go. And Joseph said, I gotta go. He left so quickly that in verse 12 it says, leaving her hanging onto his coat. He left the coat. He said, the coat will stay, but I got to go. So what in you has to go for the sake of your convictions? There's something that's going to happen to you. This is a sexual story, or a story about fleeing sexual temptations, but you can apply that to any part of your life. There's going to be a crowd that's going to say go left when you know right is the right way. How are you going to decide? Are you willing to be the one that's going to stand out and show people and say, I may be the only one that's going to go right, but I know that this is the right way for me to go. And I'm willing to leave the crowd. If we're following the crowd may be walking off a ledge. Are you still going to follow? Or are you going to follow what God has been trying to tell you this entire time? He's wanting to use you. But does he trust you with what he's put in you? Have you accepted what he's put in you for him to trust you to where he wants to take you? Let's get out of here, y'all. There's nothing weak about it. There's strength in leaving. Sometimes it's foolish in staying. There's foolishness in staying.